Hello and welcome to my review of episode 7 of The Last of Us. So this was another beautiful and heartbreaking episode featuring another queer love story, and I was totally for it. I have a few mixed thoughts on the episode, but overall I thought it was very well done and very well acted. Personally, I'm quite enjoying this more slow-paced type of storytelling, but I am curious how people who only watch the show and never played the games and essentially know nothing about the story, I'm just wondering how those types of audiences are liking the series, because I feel like they might find the plot a bit too slow and uninteresting, and I can imagine there might be some people who would be very impatient this particular episode to just get back to Joel and Ellie's storyline and are getting quite annoyed by all of these side stories and extra things. For me, I'm loving these detours where we get to really dig into the meat of these characters and find out who they really are inside. Though I will say that from a storytelling perspective, when you step back and view all the episodes together as a whole, these episodes where they spend basically the whole time exploring side stories like Bill and Frank and now Ellie and Riley, it's a little jarring. So I think maybe the creators of the show could have woven these stories into the series a little more smoothly. For example, in this episode, I think they could have weaved Ellie's backstory more into the current storyline with her and Joel by keeping the parallels that they had in the original story. So in the game, Ellie is looking for medical supplies for Joel and goes to a mall, and this is when she starts having flashbacks about Riley taking her to the mall. And I feel like this makes more sense. Having it play out in the series like it does, with Joel injured and telling Ellie to leave, and then Ellie debating whether to listen to him before she decides not to give up on Joel, and then showing her past with Riley just felt quite abrupt. And then later, when they're cutting back and forth between the present and the mall scenes from the past, it just didn't quite work that well for me. I mean, I was completely invested with the Riley and Ellie story, and then whenever we jumped back to Ellie in the present, for example, when she was frantically searching for medicine for Joel, I just found myself wanting to return to Ellie and Riley's story, and I was less engaged in Joel's injury. So I think the two parallel stories here could have been woven into the episode a little better, just to make them more relevant to each other, so it would make more sense to jump cut between both situations. On the romance side of things, Bella Ramsey and Storm Reid as Riley both nailed their roles this episode. Watching them interact was such a pleasure, and I loved every second of their time on screen together. I think there's definitely a difference in dynamic between the two in the show compared to the game, and I actually thought their portrayal in the show was better than the game. Because in the game, the mall stuff is a lot goofier. That's not to say it's worse, but it's a different type of energy. There's a really cute moment when Ellie is in the arcade and she's sitting in a car and pretends to be racing because nothing in the arcade works in the game, and Riley also creates a fake Mortal Kombat match for Ellie to play in her head, and they also have this water gun fight and a brick tossing competition. So Ellie and Riley's dynamic in the game felt a lot more like friends first and foremost, and their romance came secondary to that. And up until that moment in the photo booth when things get a little awkward between them, there was no sign that they were interested in each other, romantically speaking. However, in the show, the romantic chemistry between Ellie and Riley is so apparent, and there were so many hints and stolen glances between them. To be honest, they didn't even really feel like childhood friends to me, but more like two people who have liked each other for a really long time, but neither has confessed their feelings. And even the mall felt like more of a date than anything else. It was literally Riley taking Ellie around and showing her the 5 wonders. She had everything planned out and even got all the coins ready for the arcade beforehand so that she could wow Ellie. So Riley came off as really suave and cool, and I totally developed a minor crush on her this episode, and I didn't have that same experience with Riley in the game. My top favourite moments between their little courtship was when they were in front of the Victoria's Secret store and Riley was trying to picture Ellie wearing lingerie, and Ellie was getting all flustered and tried to check herself out in her reflection. And also that moment when they were both in the photo booth and Riley held on to Ellie for just a moment too long, and that was very sweet. And finally, that kiss scene was so perfect. It was acted so well, and their emotions and facial expressions were so good. Like with all the hesitation and the nerves and the exhilaration and joy. And seeing Ellie's face light up like a Christmas tree after Riley had no issues with Ellie kissing her was so cute. But I think while they nailed the romance in this episode, I feel like the infected not so much. First off, I don't think they should have shown the infected person in the mall halfway through the episode. I think they revealed it when Ellie and Riley were playing in the arcade and the noise wakes it up. But this felt really unnecessary to show us. I think they should have let it be a surprise to the audience rather than foreshadowing it, and it would have been more shocking and impactful that way. I also didn't like when the infected comes and Riley gets tackled by it and is immediately knocked out or out of commission for a good few seconds, and Ellie is left to avoid it and tries to stab at it for quite some time until Riley comes to help her. It just felt a bit like Henry again, where he's shown as completely incompetent, at least when fighting is concerned, and just lacking common sense, and Ellie is the only useful person to have around in a pinch. Besides Joel, of course. I mean, Riley did do something by knocking the infected with a bat, but still, Ellie is the one to stab it to death. So I just feel like Riley could have done a bit more and had a moment to shine as well. And a thing they changed from the game, which I didn't quite like, was that quite a number of infected chase Ellie and Riley through the mall. And I think having just one infected for the show was a little underwhelming. I can appreciate if they're trying to show that even just having one infected around has serious consequences, but since we're almost at the end of the series, I hoped to have at least seen a few more infected by now. And I think Ellie and Riley being chased by a group of infected and trying to escape the mall would have made for a very exciting watch and episode. Especially because this is set in a zombie apocalypse world, and so far we haven't seen a lot of zombies or major action sequences. I know the creators want to focus more on the human experience and the human connections and relationships between people, and perhaps having too many intense action sequences with hordes of zombies would be too tropey and maybe too much like a blockbuster, but I think they could have struck a balance between that. Like maybe not have too many infected as they had in the game, but at least have a few more to up the stakes a little. I also liked in the game that Ellie and Riley almost make it out of the mall, but Ellie falls down and is attacked by the infected, so Riley, who is already in a safe place, has to come back to save Ellie, and it just showed how much Riley cared about Ellie, and I thought that this was a very lovely character moment for Riley, and I wish they'd had included this in the episode. Another moment I really wished they'd had shown this episode that they didn't have in the game either was the moment when Riley starts to lose her mind, but Ellie remains the same. The show already alludes to Riley being the first person that Ellie kills, but it would have been so powerful to see how it unfolds, including all the emotions Ellie would have felt when she realized that she's not going to turn, but Riley is. It would be very tragic and dark and heartbreaking to watch, but I think it would make the episode that much more impactful and memorable. One final thing I wanted to mention about the episode was Ellie's leadership skills. So I found this quite questionable because Ellie never struck me as much of a leader. She can take care of herself and she's very independent, but she never leads people, at least in the games, and she always just feels more like a rogue character. I'm not sure if it's because the creators are setting Ellie up for something new in Season 2 that wasn't in the games, but I'm currently not really sold on this new addition to Ellie's character and personality. Leadership skills is something that's always given to the typical hero character, so I kind of don't want them to make Ellie special in this regard and give her this tropey kind of quality. And I also haven't seen Ellie demonstrate these so-called leadership skills so far in the show yet. So if they wanted to make Ellie more of a leader type character, they should have found a way to show this first without other characters telling us that she has leadership qualities, like Captain Kwong and Riley did in this episode. Because in general, when you're writing a character, you shouldn't have other characters telling the audience what this character's qualities are. You should show it first at least, and then you can get other characters to remark on these qualities later. But aside from those couple of things about the infected scenes and Ellie's leadership skills, I thoroughly enjoyed this episode. The relationship between Ellie and Riley was so beautifully done, and I'm so sad that their romance was so short-lived and that we won't get to see Riley anymore. But so we're almost at the end of the season, and I'm really curious to see how they're gonna manage to fit the rest of the first game into the final 2 episodes, because they have quite a lot of ground to cover still. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, like the video if you did, and subscribe if you want to hear more.